We have mentioned in the last chapter that the government in China has the ownership of all lands. China's properties were not commercialized until 1980s. Even after that, there were still quite some apartments were being centralized arranged by the government or SOEs. Those houses were actually considered a benefit from the company, usually SOEs, to their employees. However, from 1998, such centralized arrangement was completely cancelled. China finally had a real normal real estate market. There was no better news than this to developers. China really embraced a golden age of real estate. Property developers with different hashtags enjoyed blossom, like Venki, who's good at residential house building, and also Wanda, well known for its shopping malls and business centers. And also, our protagonist, Evergrande. In the next 10 years, Evergrande grew into a giant with rocket speed. Hui's personal wealth also see an incredible number of 12 billion RMB. Evergrande's cycle of non-stop land purchasing and refinancing is based on continuous rise of house price. Once the crazy rising stops, Evergrande's Achilles heel will be exposed. Sales at lower prices result in insufficient profits, while not low enough price will not be able to attract buyers. 2008 to 2016 was a transition period to China's real estate industry. The surging growth rate can no longer last, however, the house price just kept rising because of, number one, the easing monetary policy which gave the liquidity to the market, and number two, hesitant government policies while trying to constrain the house price. Evergrande's founder Hui Ka-yang, he's a real character. He's ferocious and courageous. He just enjoys walking on the edge of the knife. He used to have strong support from China's top national banks, such as China Construction Bank, which is an equivalent of JP Morgan to American or Deutsche Bank to German. Once we wanted to establish a steel plant in an unknown southern city in China and asked for a bank loan from CCB. That was a too obvious bad business, but Hui just insisted on it. Why? Because that was his childhood memory, because he started his career from a steel plant. Unsurprisingly, the loss was huge. In a way, this reflected Hui's weakness of personality, his overconfidence, and also an absolute authority in his company. 2008 was the first turning point of Evergrande. With the spillover effect of global financial crisis, the three-high business model of Evergrande was extremely difficult. On one hand, investors withdrew their money. On the other hand, the whole housing market just hit the bottom. Evergrande faced serious liquidity problem, and no kidding, everyone thought that would be the end of this company. However, Evergrande stood up by raising offshore debt in Hong Kong. Above $500 million coming from both Hong Kong local investors and global names like Deutsche Bank and Merrill Lynch. Please be noted here, till now Evergrande's debt ratio rose to 65% already. In November 2009, Evergrande went public in Hong Kong Stock Exchange. The founder Hui Ka-yang became the richest people in China mainland with 4.2 billion RMB personal assets. Bank loan and capital from the stock market are two very different animals. Bank loan is project-based. Company needs to negotiate with the bank, and where money goes will be supervised by the lender bank. Direct financing from the stock market is much simpler. However, once a company goes public, everything, including strength and disadvantage, could be amplified. After listed in Hong Kong, Evergrande expanded its ambition to unfamiliar areas like entertainment, football, new energy, etc. Most of the investment could hardly be considered successful. 2010 was the second crossroad. Chinese government launched a series of policies to curb the house price. We saw back and forth, but the direction was quite clear: to restrain the speculation and house price. Banks lending to property developers became increasingly tightened. Under such background, on one hand, there is enough money in the market looking for investment. On the other hand, the bank loan was so tightened, shadow bank naturally took its position. By the end of 2016, the size of China's shadow bank was around 90 trillion RMB, which rose up with the annual growth rate of 10% from 2008. Evergrande's wealth management arm, Hengda Wealth, was a typical example of shadow banking. Evergrande needed money, a lot of money, but the bank loan became increasingly difficult, so they started moving their liabilities to off-balance sheet. Here comes the renowned wealth management products. The nature and the underlying of such products are actually private debts and securitized property assets. What does that mean? Evergrande wants to borrow money from individual investors like you and me, so they label their private debts as wealth management products with implicitly guaranteed 8 to 12% annual return. Incredible, right? Investors usually have very little idea of how complicated the structure of such product could be. What they see is a powerful company launched some financial products with irresistible return. This game worked so well until one day investors saw a crack. When Evergrande missed interest payment of an offshore bond and then later on deemed by Fitch to be in default, protesters gathered outside Evergrande's Guangzhou offices shouting, "Return our money." They were worried that this embattled real estate company will funnel their savings to salvage building projects. Another interesting side of the story is that the staff of Evergrande was assigned quota to buy such products as part of the job, as a mission. For senior managers, I think it's above million RMB, sometimes 5 to 6 million. To mid-level managers, 480,000. Junior ones, 180,000. These wealth management products have brought in more than 100 billion RMB in the past 5 years. This may not be the biggest chunk of the liabilities of Evergrande, but this really had the worst influence in the society. Honestly, I don't really pity these fellows. When you love someone, you should be aware of the risk being betrayed. When you make some investment, you also need to be prepared for any possible loss. That's pretty fair.